In this video, we're going to discuss some of the extraordinary research of a man named Dr. Jacques Vallée, who single-handedly completely transformed our understanding of the mystery of UFOs. Vallée is a physicist, an astronomer, a computer scientist, and he spent decades traveling the world and carefully documenting thousands of reported encounters with UFOs, which he details in his books, such as this one here, called Passport to Magonia, and this one here, called Dimensions, a casebook of alien contact. Some of his key findings, which I'm going to share today, are just truly astonishing and I believe have the potential to genuinely revolutionize our understanding of the nature of reality. As I'll explain over the course of this video, Dr. Vallée's research directly links UFOs to consciousness, the mystery of consciousness within each one of us, to multiverse theory, to ancient mythologies, to near-death experiences and the afterlife, to religion, mysticism, shamanism, and spirituality, and to something called high strangeness, a whole range of mysterious and bizarre phenomena of a seemingly supernatural nature. It's just fascinating the way that all of these dots interconnect. And if you stick with me here today, I can almost guarantee that this is going to shift your perspective on this whole UFO mystery and perhaps even on the nature of consciousness and the cosmos. It certainly did for me.
From my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Something from another dimension of space or time?
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space.
Vallée makes the case that when it comes to UFOs, we have to think bigger than the idea of spaceships flying around from other planets or galaxies, because the data points to something even weirder than that. And he proposed instead what's now known as the Interdimensional Hypothesis, which is the idea that UFOs, at least in some cases, seem to be connected to alternate dimensions, to alternate planes or realms or invisible realities beyond this physical universe altogether. As far out there as this interdimensional hypothesis and the whole mystery of UFOs sounds to a lot of people, this video really is not about belief, it's not about speculation, this is about looking at the data and evidence. And over the course of this video, I'm going to share 7 lines of evidence from Dr. Vallée's research to support the interdimensional hypothesis. The critical importance of this is that this topic, this discussion, is about so much more than what's out there. It's also about what's in here. I'm truly convinced that this whole UFO mystery represents a key to help us awaken, to open our minds to a greater reality and to evolve as a species at a time when we desperately need it. And that's really what this channel is all about. Now, real quick, my name is Jonas. Welcome back to a channel dedicated to the exploration of consciousness. Thank you for being here today. Much appreciation to each one of you. If you're enjoying this content, if you find some value in these videos, if you could leave a like and subscribe to this channel, it goes a long way in supporting this conscious community. Now, before going further into Vallée's research, it's worth just setting the stage here to again acknowledge that here in the year of 2024, we are living in truly unprecedented times where the whole conversation around UFOs and UAP is shifting in extraordinary ways, gaining way more acceptance, and the stigma factor around this topic is reducing pretty quickly. Here we can see a headline: nearly 1 in 5 American academics say they have seen a UFO or know someone who has. Just in the past few years, the US government formally acknowledged having a top-secret UFO research program with millions of dollars in funding, declassified multiple officially unexplained UFO videos, published a congressional report acknowledging dozens of documented UFO incidents, and held historic congressional hearings in July of 2023, where we saw 3 credible individuals publicly testify in front of Congress, in front of the world, under sworn oath that UFOs are very real and need to be taken seriously. And as many of you are probably aware, this included testimony from whistleblower David Grush, who is an ex-intelligence official in the U.S. Department of Defense, who publicly testified that the U.S. government and other world governments have secretive UFO crash retrieval programs. Crash retrieval programs that have operated since before World War II and are currently in possession of highly anomalous materials all the way up through fully intact craft of non-human origin. Fully intact craft of non-human origin, Grush is saying that the U.S. government and other world governments have this in their possession right now. Right now. And he's saying all of this under sworn oath, right? Where if he lies, he's going to prison. If any of these claims from David Grush are true, we could be on the cusp of one of the biggest turning points in all of human history, where essentially we have to come to terms as a human collective with the reality that essentially we're not alone, right? Did you know that every single year there are an estimated 10 to 30,000 UFO reports that are filed all around the world? That's a lot of cases, right? Here we can see data from just one UFO research center. It's called the National UFO Reporting Center, where in the year of 2022, this organization received over 5,000 reports of supposed UFO encounters. And this organization has well over 100,000 cases that it's documented in its database going back the past few decades. This is just one organization. There are other organizations such as MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which also has a database of over 100,000 reported UFO encounters. And of course, this is nothing new, right? Here we can see data from Project Blue Book, which was the first attempt of the U.S. Air Force to actually investigate UFOs. And we can see from the year 1947 to 1969, over 12,000 cases that Blue Book studied. And 701 of those cases were officially unidentified, about 5%. Again, this is back in 1969, right? And the number of unidentified cases has grown substantially since that time. Here we can see a picture of Dr. Jacques Vallee on the right, standing next to a man named J. Allen Hynek. And both of them were hired as scientific consultants to Project Blue Book all the way back in the 1960s. So Vallee has been doing this for a really long time. After decades of carefully scientifically analyzing the data and evidence, Vallee not only concluded that in some cases UFOs represent a true, genuine mystery, he also began theorizing as to this deeper question as to what are they? What is the true nature of UFOs? And secondly, what do we stand to learn through investigating this topic about the nature of reality, about the nature of mind and consciousness? And there are a number of different hypotheses here, right? Such as, one, top secret military technology, unexplained natural phenomena, or the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's interesting to acknowledge that a lot of people think about this in kind of a binary way. I mean, either it's top secret military technology, or made from human hands, or this is of extraterrestrial origin. But the truth is, there are many different possibilities here. There are many different hypotheses to consider. And again, the data suggests something way weirder, right? Some of the other hypotheses include the interdimensional hypothesis, the psychosocial or collective consciousness hypothesis, the time travel hypothesis, the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, simulation hypothesis, some combination of all of these, or something else that we can't even really quite fathom or conceptualize at this point. Now, all of these hypotheses demand independent consideration, right? But in this video, again, I'm going to present 7 lines of evidence to support the interdimensional hypothesis, because after years of doing my own research here, I'm personally convinced that at least in some significant portion of cases, the data very clearly points to the conclusion that UFOs are linked to multiverse theory, to the idea that we live in an interdimensional reality, and to novel theories of consciousness, that consciousness itself goes way beyond this physical body and brain, right? And it's also interesting to acknowledge that David Grush, as well as a lot of other high-ranking officials who have gone on the record about this topic, such as Lou Elizondo and others, have spoken out in support of the interdimensional hypothesis. David Grush is quoted as saying, "It could be that UFOs are not necessarily extraterrestrial, and it's actually coming from a higher dimensional physical space that might be co-located right here." Now, before returning to Dr. Jacques Vallée, it's worth just acknowledging that there exists right now credible scientific theoretical frameworks in support of this idea that we live in a multiverse, right? This idea of multiverse theory, which I've discussed in previous videos. We know that the vast majority of reality is invisible to our physical senses, right? We know this. The idea that reality is interdimensional, this is something that's widely discussed in modern theoretical physics. I mean, string theory and M theory and the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics, these are all examples of existing scientific theories that posit that reality is interdimensional. And we also find this idea of multiverse theory in ancient teachings and spiritual wisdom teachings from around the world and all throughout time. Just as an example, in Hinduism, we find this teaching of lokas, which is this idea that essentially reality is interdimensional, that all these realms are interconnected, that we live in a sort of multi-layered mystery of existence, and that each one of these realms or layers of existence is inhabited by sentient life of which we currently, as a human species, have no real knowledge of. So let's now return to Dr. Jacques Vallée's research, who, again, after working with Project Blue Book in the 1960s, spent decades traveling the world and carefully documenting thousands of UFO close encounter reports. And his research really focuses attention not just on the origin of UFOs, but also on the way that they influence and affect the culture and the belief system of us humans. Vallée was puzzled by the finding that many of these UFO reports coincided with all this seemingly paranormal or supernatural or high strangeness phenomena, and he also was intrigued by the realization that modern accounts of UFOs seem to directly parallel or coincide with ancient mythologies from around the world of seemingly supernatural beings. Here we come to 7 arguments against the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or 7 arguments in favor for the interdimensional hypothesis. I'm going to walk through each one here. First is superphysics and the quasi-physical nature of UFOs. Vallée points to a multitude of cases in which UFOs operate in a way which completely defy our understanding of the known physical laws of the universe and seem to exhibit quasi-physical or metaphysical properties, right? Here we can see a headline where the government reports say UFOs broke the sound barrier without sonic booms. Here's a similar headline that says US has evidence of UFOs breaking sound barrier without a sonic boom. Again, this defies our understanding of the laws of physics, right? If an object is moving at faster than the speed of sound, it must displace the air in a way that creates sonic booms. If an object is tracked on radar, moving at hypersonic speeds, faster than the speed of sound, without creating a sonic boom, it's almost like it's slipping through this reality or tunneling through this reality in a way that isn't quite abiding by our known laws of physics. There's also this quality of transmedium travel, UFOs operating not only in space, but also in Earth's atmosphere and also underwater. There are all these documented accounts of UFOs maneuvering from the atmosphere, flying around, going into the water, and then moving underwater, again at these incredibly fast speeds that should be impossible to our known laws of physics. In a previous video, I discussed this famous UFO footage out of Puerto Rico in 2013, the Aguadilla Airport UFO incident, where we can see this unidentified object that was tracked on radar and also caught on video. It was invisible to the eye and yet detected by infrared cameras, and we can see this anomalous object moving from the air into the water. But it gets even weirder because, as we can see, this UFO exits the water and actually changes shape and splits into two. We have one object that splits into two. If this is a physical nuts and bolts craft, how can we explain this unbelievable capacity to morph and actually split into two? Vallée describes a number of these cases in which UFOs actually morph or change shape in real time. He discusses a famous case of Dr. X in 1968, who is an anonymous French physician. Even though this was an anonymous witness, this case, you can look it up, was very thoroughly documented, right? And this French physician, back in 1968, witnessed two UFOs at a close distance merge together into a single object. So again, what this is pointing to is something way stranger and more mysterious than a physical spaceship traveling from a distant star system, right? It seems even more mysterious than that. Now, moving to point number 2, line of evidence number 2 from Jacques Vallée, Vallée argues that the frequency of UFO reports is inconsistent with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This is wild to think about, but Vallée argues that the sheer number of UFO encounters and reports and landings is so great that it challenges any rational explanation of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Vallée walks through the specific math and the numbers in this book here, Dimensions, but based on his data set of several thousand cases over a 20-year period, he reaches what he describes as a staggering conclusion that there were no fewer than 3 million UFO appearances over just that 20-year period of his data set, which, as he says, this number is totally absurd. Using a single probe the size of a beer keg in orbit 10,000 miles above Earth, human technologies as it exists today would be able to capture in a few weeks most of the important facts. If UFOs really are spaceships from other planets, then how can we explain just the staggering number of these appearances of these objects all over the world and all throughout time? It seems to be pointing to some greater mystery here. Now, the third line of evidence is that Vallée connects modern reports of UFOs to ancient historical accounts of strange flying objects and encounters with supernormal phenomena throughout history. Now, Vallée searched through the historical records for stories of anomalous sightings and found that all over the world and all throughout time there are these accounts of strange flying objects in almost every single indigenous society. We can see this depicted in ancient art from around the world, and it's worth acknowledging that all over the world, from the Sumerians to the ancient Egyptians to the Aztecs, Mayans, Australian Aboriginals, the Dogon tribe in Mali, the Zulu tribe in South Africa, the Shipibo tribe in the Amazon basin, and various American Indian tribes from the Hopi, the Cree, the Zuni. All of these social cultural groups have these elaborate cosmologies which include reports and accounts of strange beings and objects flying around in our skies. Vallée makes a compelling case that there is a continuity of experience between these ancient accounts of strange flying objects with the modern UFO phenomenon. Could it be that these are all manifestations of the same underlying mystery that has just been filtered through different cultures? One example that Vallée discusses is that of the jinn, who are described in the Quran, the sacred text of Islam, right? And the jinn were these supposedly supernatural beings who inhabited a state between the material and the immaterial. In ancient reports of the jinn and modern reports of UFOs, both are described as appearing and disappearing at will, changing shape, moving through the sky, and manipulating reality in seemingly inexplicable ways. Another example of this is that of the Fae, or fairies, in Celtic traditions. There's an extensive folklore in Celtic traditions involving the Fae, or mythological fairy beings, and again, Vallée argues that in both these ancient mythologies and modern UFO sightings, we find descriptions of strange lights in the sky encounters with otherworldly beings, abductions, and experiences in which space and time seem to be manipulated. So again, this is the idea that Vallée presents. Could it be that this is all manifestations of the same underlying mysterious phenomenon or phenomena that's just being filtered through different social and cultural groups? Now, continuing on with this, Vallée also links UFOs to religions and religious miracles. It's a similar idea here, but in both ancient historical accounts of religious miracles and modern UFO sightings, there are these depictions of extraordinary events that seem to defy natural laws, such as mysterious flying objects, floating lights, altered states of consciousness, encounters with otherworldly beings. In the Hindu scriptures, we find these descriptions of Vimanas, right? This appears in a text called the Mahabharata, right? Sorry if I mispronounced that. The Mahabharata, these Vimanas are described as flying chariots and sophisticated machines carrying godlike beings, and are also characterized as shining metallic objects that move at incredible speeds through the sky. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, we find the book of Ezekiel, right? And in the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel describes this famous vision of a divine chariot guided by strange beings. In the text itself, it states, "I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures." So here we have a description from over 2,000 years ago of a strange metallic spinning wheel kind of phenomena with beings inside appearing out of the sky. And once again, I'll ask, could it be that this prophetic experience that Ezekiel describes is pointing to the same mystery, the same anomalous phenomena of UFOs as they're described in the present day? Could it be that the angelic beings that Ezekiel described thousands of years ago are somehow connected to the occupants of reported UFOs in the modern era? Vallée argues that there is a case to be made that this connection is legit. The next line of evidence in support of the interdimensional hypothesis is the manipulation of space and time. As Vallée describes, almost universally in these cases of UFO close encounters, people describe the subjective sense of space and time being distorted. Time either speeds up or slows down dramatically, which seems to be indicative of something far more exotic than spaceships from other planets. A famous example is that of the Travis Walton case, which got so much kind of notoriety that it was adapted into a film called Fire in the Sky. Now, Travis Walton was a logger out in the forests of Arizona. In 1975, along with a group of 5 other witnesses, Walton sighted this metallic UFO that was shining with all these different lights, and when he approached, Walton claims to actually have been abducted and taken on board this craft. Now, Walton was missing for 5 days, right? This led to this massive manhunt, and it's just a fascinating case because so many people were involved. Walton was missing for 5 days. He awoke to find himself on the side of the highway, and subjectively, even though he was gone for 5 days, he thought that he had only been gone for a few hours. For a few hours, right? So we see this quality of time distortion, of time either being compressed or expanded, and we hear this again and again and again in UFO reports, as well as these ancient mythologies of encountering these otherworldly beings. If these UFOs have some mysterious capacity to manipulate space and time, to manipulate our subjective experience of space and time, is this pointing to something stranger than spaceships from another planet? I would say absolutely yes, and certainly that's what Vallée argues, right? Next, we come to the 6th line of evidence for the interdimensional hypothesis: UFOs connected to high strangeness. Now let's just define high strangeness. Such an interesting idea. High strangeness encompasses a wide range of unusual or bizarre phenomena that go beyond the typical characteristics of UFO sightings, often involving elements that defy our knowledge of physical laws and include all kinds of strange things such as floating orbs, entity encounters, portals, cryptid-like beings, spirits, out-of-body experiences, poltergeists. I mean, the list goes on and on. But this is famously represented by a place called, or at a place called Skinwalker Ranch. This too is another topic that really deserves its own video. Skinwalker Ranch is such an interesting enigma, right? Because this is a ranch that's located in northeastern Utah, and it's a hotbed of UFO sightings, right? There's all these UFO sightings there, but in addition to UFOs, there's a range of reports of all kinds of strange phenomena. And this is well documented in the book, The Hunt for Skinwalker. The US government famously contracted an organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, to study this site, to investigate the strangeness at Skinwalker Ranch, right? And these investigations continue and are documented in the modern TV series about Skinwalker Ranch. At Skinwalker Ranch, there's this whole range of paranormal activity and high strangeness, everything from floating orbs to cattle mutilations to strange cryptid beings, poltergeist-like activities. One famous report out of NIDS included researchers witnessing a portal opening up in the sky and this shadowy being or creature, something, entity, traversing out of this portal and entering into this physical reality. There's another famous story out of Skinwalker Ranch where in 1994, the family who was living there at the time, there was a rancher, father, with his son. They had a whole bunch of cattle. The rancher and his son saw a giant, unusually large wolf on the property, which attacked a cow and attempted to drag the cow out of its pen, right? In an effort to save the cow, the rancher and his son shot at this wolf from a close range with a handgun and then even again with a high-powered rifle. And as the story goes, despite being shot multiple times at close range, the wolf showed no sign of injury, showed no sign of distress. There was no blood whatsoever on the ground. The creature certainly did not die, kind of looked over and calmly walked away. The rancher and his son tracked the wolf, followed its footprints, which led to a muddy area where the prints abruptly stopped. They just vanished. There were no further signs of the wolf. It was almost like the wolf disappeared on site. And again, this coincides with these reports out of Skinwalker Ranch of these glowing orbs floating around that then transform either into these beings or into these UFO-like objects. I mean, again, my friends, this is really far out there, but it's documented, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of witnesses that have reported this phenomena, and all the way up through the research institutions, the US government, the Department of Defense, studying this site and documenting these anomalous experiences, right? It's super interesting. Skinwalker Ranch and other UFO reports demonstrably connect UFOs to a whole range of all this mysterious phenomena, which again is forcing us to expand our thinking, to think bigger than spaceships from other planets. And lastly here, the last line of evidence that Vallée shares is that UFOs are directly linked to the consciousness within each one of us. By this I mean that UFO close encounter experiences affect our consciousness and are in many, many cases described as shifting us into subjectively a different state of consciousness, a non-ordinary state of consciousness. This is really encapsulated in this book here called Beyond UFOs, which this too deserves its own video because this book documents over 3,000 UFO experiencers, right? Surveyed over 3,000 experiencers from all around the world, and it's just a fascinating data set. But 70% of experiencers say that their encounter with a UFO included a sense of expanded consciousness. 80% of these encounters included a report of an out-of-body experience. This is just fascinating stuff. A really interesting example of this is the feature of telepathic communication, right? In many of these UFO close encounter reports, people describe subjectively receiving some sort of telepathic communication from the craft or from supposedly the occupants of the craft themselves. This is famously documented in the case of the Ariel School sighting. This is a renowned case that happened in Zimbabwe, where this metallic object, this UFO, landed in the schoolyard at the Ariel School in Zimbabwe when all the kids were at recess. There were over 60 witnesses to this sighting, right? And independently, a number of the witnesses described receiving these telepathic messages, which they often described in very similar ways. They described this telepathic communication as almost like a warning that if humankind continues on the path that it's on right now, we could be at risk of disaster. They were seeing these images of cataclysmic destruction to planet Earth and to our human collective, to our human species, with the encouragement to avert this disaster, that we need to change our ways, right? It's very fascinating that a whole number of these young children independently were describing this telepathic communication in consistent ways. And again, it's surprising how common this quality of telepathic communication is. And if UFOs were spaceships from other planets, it would be really hard to explain this quality of mind-to-mind connection. How is it that UFOs seem to affect our consciousness directly? Further evidence that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is just insufficient to account for UFOs. And lastly, I'll mention the CE5 protocol. You may have heard of a man named Dr. Stephen Greer, who's an outspoken advocate for UFOs and UFO disclosure, right? And Stephen Greer kind of pioneered what's called the CE5 protocol, this set of techniques and practices designed to establish peaceful contact and communication with some sort of non-human intelligence. CE5 stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which refers to human-initiated contact with otherworldly beings, in which a group of people will come together, enter a meditative state, and just using the power of their mind, their collective mind, attempt to mentally connect with some otherworldly intelligence. And there are many anecdotes of just using the power of this group mind, manifesting the appearance of lights in the sky and UFOs and encounters with otherworldly intelligence, right? Again, this points to somehow consciousness, the mind, being able to directly connect to whatever this UFO mystery is in a way that is way weirder than a nuts and bolts spaceship, a metallic spaceship visiting from another planet. UFOs are connected to consciousness itself, and the mystery of consciousness really is the key to understanding all of this. So I know this is a lot. Let's begin to wrap this up. As you can see, getting a little hot and sweaty over here. I get fired up about this stuff. The question is, how can we create a unified theory? A unified theory that begins to explain UFOs in the context of all this strangeness, right? And this is again where the interdimensional hypothesis comes in, because if we posit that, one, reality is interdimensional. Secondly, that consciousness is also interdimensional, that there's more to the consciousness within us than this physical body. And thirdly, that it's all one, that this consciousness is seamlessly interwoven into the very fabric of all of reality. Now we have a way, we have a framework to begin to understand why these UFOs can directly affect our consciousness. why these UFOs can operate in these weird quasi-physical ways, why they're linked to all these prophetic or religious experiences. There's an incredible possibility here to bring together science and spirituality into a new worldview, a new understanding of this mystery of life, in which we remember this ancient wisdom that we're multidimensional beings living in a multidimensional reality. And again, I think that this is the next evolutionary step for humankind. This represents the evolution of our consciousness during a time where we desperately need to reconnect. It could be that the very symbol of UFOs is an evolutionary catalyst forcing us to awaken and remember there is more. And Vallée, one of his more kind of provocative ideas is called the control system hypothesis, which is that UFO phenomena appear to humankind in a way that's almost staged. Very specifically, in the sociocultural context of the time, this mysterious interdimensional phenomena will manifest, will present itself to us in a way very specifically that's creating change in our consciousness, right? That's opening our minds, right? And influencing human beliefs and behaviors, provoking a specific psychological and cultural response, and thus shaping human development. It's interesting to acknowledge that in this book, Beyond UFOs, 71% of experiencers agree that the appearance of UFOs is part of a larger plan to promote the evolution of human consciousness, species-wide. And this seems to be the very consistent message that UFOs, the appearance of the symbol of the UFO, is communicating. So thank you so very much for being here, for joining me today. I truly appreciate each one of you, especially if you made it this far in the video. Truly, truly appreciate you. If you enjoy this content, please be sure to check me out over on Patreon, where you can support this work in this conscious community. It does mean the world to me, and it makes a really big difference in me doing this work. So thank you again, and I'll see you back here very soon.